Hello friends, in this project I'm going to customize OMG Royal Bee to be my character Hazel Ferrera. As you can see, I already did her hair most of the way it's probably going to be by the end. Hazel's hair is a little darker than this brown and gold mix, but this color looks good enough. Right now I'll just take off her factory paint. Hazel is a little demon type critter based on Nutella. She has darker color on her back and arms, so I'll use the opportunity as I fix the acetone damage to sand her back so that the paint sticks better. Before I paint her at all, I'm going to do some of the mods that she needs. I'm not planning to do too much to her actual body, but I do want to cut off her little toes to make her hooves. I'm gonna extend them a little further, and I'll do that with some Super Sculpey. I want to see if I can make them a little heavier. If I can get her to stand up, that will be great, but weight is good enough for me. Super Sculpey is definitely heavier than UltraLight, but not heavy enough at this size to be enough, so I'm going to mix in some glass beads and liquid Sculpey to try to get it there. I also squish her feet in to get the right shape on the inside. I'm also sculpting her other details in Sculpey. I wanted a thinner wire for the end of her tail, but this one pipe cleaner wasn't strong enough to hold a pose after it baked. I'm also just going to use a piece of paper as the base for her wings because I misplaced my sheet of cured UltraLight. This is the base shape, and I'll decide how to do the feathers later. I made her horns and nails off camera, and I scratched in some detail before curing them all. I added a sloppy outer layer of Super Sculpey to the hooves so I can properly sand them and not worry about the glass inside. It makes them bulky right now, but I'm going to refine it. On the second round of sculpting, I'm adding more clay to the legs of the hooves so that it blends better. I'll add some little fur texture to the cuticle. I think that's called the coronet. I'll also add a cuticle to her horns as well so those lay better. I just remembered that she needs longer ears too, so I'll shape those out. I sculpted the inside, but the texture of the uncured clay makes it so I can't get them looking much alike. I patched up the end of the tail, and I'm gonna put a loosely packed bunch of foil to make her tail chunkier. I'm doing the same thing that I did for the first pair of Miles' tails, but with UltraLight. I'll remove that bulk after it's cured to see if we can get it bending again after this next batch. I've done this before with results, so that's why I keep trying it. This one didn't work, but at least the tail isn't super duper heavy and the thinner part still bends. The rest of the clay details are ready and I sanded them off camera. I'm going to put feathers on her wings. Most doll customizers use real feathers, but these are really tiny and I'm really particular about wings being accurate. I'll use printer paper to make a bunch of little feathers and then I'm gluing them to the base. I'm going to lay down 4 layers of feathers, radiating in a direction from the top of the wing's shoulder, starting from the underarm of the wing so that the feathers lay properly. I go farther than the wing base, but that's okay. It's just a little irritating that the edge is thick, but whatever. Before I glue everything on, I'm going to put on a base coat in brown, but this turns out to be a bad idea later. I'm using epoxy glue to put on her accessories. Of course, the horns and ears are having a hard time sticking right now as I move her around, but they wind up sticking at the end. I already put holes in her back with just my nail file tool, and I'm going to slip in the support wires in there with some epoxy. I let it sit overnight and now I'm going to do a little bit of blending with some hot glue. I think this is probably how I'm going to have to get the hooves to blend because of the material of the legs, but I can probably go over the rest of the glue with Paperclay Delight to make it look nice. The legs took an excessive amount of time to get the shape decent, but the texture that I wind up with really upsets me. So I guess I should have considered the horns a little bit earlier. Well, I cut away some of the hair to get them in a decent position, but thinking it over convinced me to use that spare to reroot around the base of the horns. I used what I cut off to do this, and I poked the plugs in underneath where the horns will ultimately lay, because there's still a gap there right now. And I'm going to do that until it looks decently full. I poked holes for this before rerooting, but even places where I just made a hole with the hair plug alone was not as hard to do as I had feared it was. This all took me about 2 hours to do, so it's not too bad. The bad part is, however, that I didn't remove her head for this beforehand. These new plugs definitely aren't very snug in there. I'm going to take off her head so I can put some Fabrifix in there to glue them down. I'll use the opportunity to glue some pins in from the inside for the horns and ears. Unfortunately, her neck plug broke, so I had to cut her head open to get it out, and that was really hard to do because I guess I didn't cut a big enough hole. But I got it eventually, and I glued the plug back onto the body. But I tried to put her head on again, and the plug broke again, and I didn't feel like trying to get it out. So I used the bean method to get her head back on. But the wings and tail became loose before I got there. I'll super glue them in for a minute while I get connections made in Paperclay Delight. I wind up adding some paper clay to the tail to get it looking a little smoother, and that base coat makes sanding this really gross. I also do this for her horns and ears so they can blend better into the head. She's all together now, with different hands, and I can start painting her. I'm putting down a base coat of straight chocolate brown all along her back and tail, her wings, and her hooves. I'm gonna skip trying to get a color match for the skin tone because it doesn't blend with the plastic anyway. So I'm just gonna paint in the lighter brown areas as well. The base coat for this one is pinker brown colors so that I can maybe get some lively undertones in the finish. With an idea kind of like how Dolly Pop and Metal Rabbit do their face-ups. I don't know if it was the undercoat or if the paint that I mixed up just actually looks good, but I'm happier with the look than I thought I'd be. I paint this on in a few coats until it's opaque without many brush strokes. I was trying my best to get a good result on her face. When it looks good, I'm going to paint in the darker brown areas until they're also opaque. I added water onto my brush when I was going over the joints so it would seep into the tiny areas, and that worked out pretty well. Once she looks good, I'm going to kind of stipple on a gentler distinction between the two colors because I don't want it to be so stark. This is kind of hard to do in the smaller areas. I'm going to leave her to dry completely overnight before I varnish her with a few layers of straight DuraClear matte. Now that the browns are nice and sealed, I can go in and paint all of the other parts on her. I'm painting her nails in red since that's her favorite nail polish color and reflects the Nutella logo. Her tail spade and horns are going to be gold, which is the natural color of her hooves and nails. She's also got a trim of gold on the bottom feathers of her wings. I paint all of this in a few layers until it's all opaque. I didn't record this, but I added an initial layer of soft chalk pastels and mostly a pinkish red to add some blushing to her skin. I'm keeping her kind of stylized, but I realized that light blushing makes even stylized dolls really cute. I sprayed her with a coat of Mr. SuperClear, only one because I was distracted at the time, and started sketching her eyebrows and pupils with a regular pencil. Doing the pupil first can be easier because you're placing smaller shapes to point in one direction and you can just radiate outwards with the iris. I don't think I have a lot of problems with placing eyes to look in the same direction, but I know a lot of people do, so that's just a suggestion. That being said, I don't really care for perfect symmetry in my projects. Side eyes are good for that. And add personality to my projects, which is my favorite. I'll just block in her irises for now and fill in the white and black. I didn't feel like recording the next bit of pastels, but I added some as well. Just a little bit of blushing on her cheeks and skin of her horns, and some shading between her brows and eyelids. I just build up more color on the eyes and lips with each new layer. I tried to add some texture this time, but was also being wary with the amount of layers I was using. I didn't have any issues with the paint while I was doing this face-up. I guess I tried a little more than I should have with the eyes and lips. I was worried that the pastels on the eyes wasn't going to work, but it turned out alright. I put in some darker freckles with the golden ones for variation, but I should have just left it to the gold ones. I wasn't planning on it, but I did add some freckles to the rest of her body as usual. She looks good with the pencils now, so I'll paint in solid colors. The lips look fine, but the color wasn't strong enough, and the paint kind of covered the pencils completely. I'll also paint in this layer of her eye, a little gray near the top of her eye for shading. I can also make sure her irises are the proper shape here. I also paint in her pupil so that it has a matte finish. Her eyelashes are a dark brown to look softer. I painted the gold freckles so that they had the same glimmer to them. Speaking of, I don't have micro glitters, but the metallic paints that I have do, so I have some very, very diluted and rub just a tiny bit of that on her cheeks and forehead with my fingers. I don't care much for the detail, but that's how to add it if you want. I didn't seal this in before I decided to condition her hair, so it all washed off, which is good if you don't like how that all turned out. I'm gonna go in and add some of that micro glitter stuff to her irises. I have the tiniest bit of gold paint with some water, and I'm dabbing that on her irises with the tiniest bit of straight through clear matte. Thank goodness that watering that down didn't lessen the matte appearance and kept it looking matte. I don't want the glitter on her pupils, so I go over the black. I think that the size, shape, and amount of catchlight makes or breaks my customs, so I carefully go in with white and finagle until it looks good. I'm going to make some new feathers for the bottom of her wings because the ones that are on her right now are kind of mangled. I traced some shapes on cardstock, not regular printer paper, and saturated that with some super glue to give it strength. I tried to super glue 2 layers together, but only a few worked out. I gave them a base coat in yellow, then paint on enough gold to get them opaque. Cut her wings open from the bottom so that I can slip them in to look proper and glue them in with Eileen's tacky glue right now. When it's a little bit dry, I'll go over the outside with more super glue, especially over the connection of the feathers, to try and get them as strong as they can get. I'm gonna bite the bullet and go ahead and try to get her wings and tail solid with a tiny bit of epoxy putty. I'm gonna let that dry for a while. I'll trace over the mangle feathers and between the upper layers with printer paper, cut 4 of those for each side of the wings, and glued those with more tacky glue. I paint over the wings completely again when the glue is dry. This time I use watered down Duraclear gloss, figuring that if watered down matte will get a glossier look, then watering down gloss will get a more matte look. And that works really well. I added a few layers all over her skin. And of course her freaking head fell off again. I didn't feel like opening her head for a 3rd time for this, so I shoved a very long wire as far into her body as I could, thread a beetle onto it, and shoved the other really long end into her body as well. So then, here she is all done. I think she turned out super cute. I'm not crazy about the way the clay pieces are connected, especially because the stuff on her back isn't connected fantastically, but it hasn't outright fallen off yet. The skirt is from FeLixUA on Etsy. The bra is from OMG Pop BB, and the jacket is from the original doll, OMG Royal Bee. Her face is so cute, and the paint on her body stuck really well and didn't give me problems when I was using pencils.